Hi, everyone. Jonathan Brandt with GoOutLiving. We have a great guest today. We have Veronique Ory, who is an intuitive movement and mindful awareness guide, as well as an author. Welcome. It is a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
So, like I was telling you, your story resonated with me. It's inspirational for me. I think we all go down a journey that brings us where we didn't expect, but yours definitely changed from a theater owner to yoga. I mean, what a change. Why don't you tell us a little bit about everything?
Yeah, I I grew up with grandparents from Hungary on my dad's side and French on my mom's side. And some of my favorite memories as a kid was coming together and being in the storytelling and laughing and feeling like, oh, this is what it's about. It's coming together in the storytelling. And sometimes there's laughter, sometimes there's tears, but ultimately it's a way to connect, to understand each other deeper. And so that was the seed. I thought, okay, how do I do this all the time? And so that translated to, of course, I'll be a theater major. And then I didn't want to wait to be cast in different things. And so I thought, well, I'll just start my own company like you do.
Right.
And so I just started producing the plays out of college that I had read in college, plays like Proof and How I Learned to Drive, these plays that had garnered Pulitzer Prizes and Tony Awards. And these were parts that I thought were multifaceted, so layered characters that we relate to, that they're flawed like we all are, and you fall in love with them and you root for them even though they have their things that are, obstacles of sorts. And so that was the run when I was in Los Angeles. And then when I moved to New York, I produced a revival of True West by Sam Shepard. And I had a friend and a colleague come up to me afterwards and she said, that was great, but why are you producing a revival of something that had such a great run on Broadway? You should really look at producing new plays. And so then I thought, oh, yeah, you're right. And so then I started developing new plays. I had an emerging playwrights program. We did readings and workshops. And then eventually there was this route to off Broadway productions. And so all together between the LA run and the New York City run, we were producing really full seasons for 17 years. And as the end of that journey was coming, I was starting to feel like the stress that I was holding was not something that I could hold for much longer. And usually this comes to us when there's a forced pause. So if anyone listening has ever been sick or all of a sudden lost their job, or end of relationship, or like a major loss of a loved one, there's these moments in life where there's a reckoning of, am I living a joyful life? Am I living a life that feels like a life well lived? Or am I sort of stretching things through a paradigm of maybe what I was taught? And so a lot of us, it's like, okay, like, do I believe this, or am I parroting something that I heard from my parents or caregivers or mentors or boss, or whoever the person that we're looking up to, or whoever we think like knows better than we do? And so I love these moments of pause because it really forces, almost like we're in stride, as if we're like running the marathon of our life, but we're in a sprint pace for a lot of us. If there's any like fellow type A's listening, like there's so much joy in the productivity and crossing the things off and like in the doing, right? There's so much pride when I talk to people more often than not. How are you doing? I'm so busy. I'm overwhelmed. I'm stressed. And there's almost like this badge of honor. Like, very rarely do you see someone, how are you doing? I feel so rested and I feel really joyful. And I just feel like just generally at peace. You don't you don't usually hear people say that. And almost like they'd be embarrassed too. Like there's all these over people over here that are overwhelmed. How would I say like, "Oh, well, I've just been reading this really great book and you know, what are you up to?" And so when yoga found me, or I found yoga, who knows how it happened, but really it was a hurricane that came to New York City, which is pretty remarkable. That doesn't normally happen. And the subways closed and Broadway closed. And when these things happen, this is like a really major big deal. And my roommate at the time, we were holed up in our apartment for a couple days. And what's so wonderful about these moments of forced pause is you realize all the false urgencies that we put on ourselves because all of a sudden there's nothing actually to do. And so that was that was one of the gifts of this major storm. And so after a couple days, my roommate, apparently he had been going to yoga every Sunday. It was like his church. I had no idea until afterwards. And so he had heard that the yoga studio had opened up. We were living in Astoria, Queens, and the yoga studio, was still open, which is remarkable, the yoga room. He said, "I think they opened up. Do you want to go to a class?" And I thought, "Oh, okay." At this point, I'm in my 30s. I had different forays of trying it over the years, and it didn't land. And I love sharing that because I think it's really, like we had said before we hit record, it's our receptivity, the timing, the teacher, the style, all of these things coming together where it just makes sense. And that was one of those moments where, of course, there had to be a hurricane. And of course, I had to live a certain amount of my life before I had a certain amount of receptivity. And I think also, too, in the space of not running a million miles an hour, where I had sort of started this energy of slowing down, where I was able to show up and just be a little more clear. And and after that class, I went to the front desk. I said, "I'm signing up for a monthly unlimited pass. I'm coming here all of my days. I want to feel like this all of my days." And so that was a really big transition. And I used to say in jest, that I go to yoga class for the safety of others because there's so much that provokes trigger in general, but I think especially if you live in an urban environment, because if you're sensitive at all of the anxieties and the stresses and the rush, you can't help but feel like you're sponging those energies up, and you're existing in that, even though it's not necessarily your anxiety or your rush, but somehow you're inhabiting it. So it was such a powerful reminder to slow down. And then as I was moving through the practice, I thought, oh, this is actually a continuation of the storytelling thread of my youth, of let's bring people together. Let's have some kind of thought provoking experience and let's leave changed, right? That we come together, we go through something together, and then the hope is that we part company better than when we arrived. And so that's the remembering and the re-remembering of the practice, which is why it's not like, oh, I'm trying to arrive somewhere, but rather it's called a practice because we continue to do it. And so that has been part of, I think, the legacy that I was born into, of feeling this deep call to lift the collective as much as possible. And and it's really powerful when we can connect in that way. And so that's a little bit of the theater to yoga journey, which is, it's all yoga really. That connection thread.
It's very spiritual.
Yeah, it is. The spiritual practice It's so interesting. I have some clients that say, "Oh, I'm just here for the physical." They and a lot of people in the West, they go to yoga because they're like, "I wanna be fit. I want to be thin, or I want to be more flexible, or I wanna work on my balance," right? There's, like, these physical goals. You might see someone in a certain pose on Instagram and you're like, "Oh, that seems like something I might wanna do." Or maybe you see it and you think, "Wow, that's really intimidating. I'll never be able to do that, but I could try." And so what we discover the more that we practice is we realize, and there's so much science to back this, that the mind and the body are intertwined. And so what's so phenomenal about this on the mat, off the mat practice is what we tell ourselves we can or cannot do, we end up proving ourselves right. And so how do we want to prove ourselves right? Right. So if I say, "Oh, I'll never be able to balance on my hands," I probably will never be able to. But if I try on, like, well, maybe I could. Maybe if I'm in the visualization of it, and then eventually I'll keep practicing, and then one day it might click. And then, okay, if I'm thinking, something about my life, like I'll never be able to do, I might prove myself right, but then the thought is, well, okay, if I'm able to do this thing on the mat that I thought I couldn't do, then what is it that I'm telling myself off the mat that I'm limiting myself or sort of self-sabotaging in a certain way? And so it is such a gateway into self-empowerment, which I think is just so profound and impactful.
It's that positive attitude that really can, I mean, it goes throughout your life if you allow it.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, I remember when I was first going to class, of course, in New York City, there's gymnasts and dancers and very hyper mobile people who are standing on their hands and doing very impressive poses. But to be able to breathe in those shapes and to have a certain ease that it's not, "Oh, here I am in this shape," but it's like strenuous, but rather it feels like an extension. And really, the shapes are meant to be a portal into the self. So it's like, what is the mind doing in the shape? How is the breath? Is it connecting you to something? And so I started to think, okay, rather than being intimidated by this, how can I shift the lens and be inspired by it? And I think that this is really important for the off the mat practice because we might, especially in this social media age, we might see people and we might think like, "Oh gosh, they're so far along in their career," or we might idolize their family life or what have you. And what's so powerful about shifting away from the intimidation or the judgment or any kind of like resentments or triggers around that into being inspired by it is, oh, if this is possible in this other human being, then it means that it's possible for me too, right? The hopes and the dreams and the wishes that we have, we are being shown. So it's that see to believe that it's possible. And so that can be really empowering. All of these things that we think, oh gosh, this is just such a far reaching dream. This will never happen for me. It's like, well, what if it can? And then we just little by little shed those doubts. And what's so empowering about that is once we shift into that space of inspiration, then it's like the attachment to the thing doesn't have a hold on us, right? So you can even just feel that physiologically come through you of, oh, like I have that now. And you don't even have to achieve the thing, but you can energetically hold it. And so then you become this magnet of course, it's going to find you or something greater that you can't even sort of conjure in your mind. And that's one of the powerful pieces of manifestation, that it's less about thinking positive thoughts and, just writing down, whatever it is over and over, but it's integrated, that you believe it on a subconscious level. And then basically anything is possible, which is so powerful. And as I've seen that through my physical practice, the emotional, mental, as well as the spiritual practice, it starts to really help connect to this co-creation. So I think about, connecting to spirit and, whatever someone's belief is. And so then it's less about the ego of like, I'm trying to make this happen, but rather like, what is best for the collective? What is the offering that can be most impactful in the here and the now? And so that feels like a really strong orientation, I think, to help all of us to have that kind of navigation. And then it's less about sort of like the horizontal plane, like the things that we experience through the senses, the things that tend to be like weighing us down. It's like, okay, like where is the purpose, where is the inspiration? And then even just like thinking vertically, it like helps lift that sense of overwhelm or fatigue that a lot of us feel. And then it's like, oh, like turn the dial up on creativity, what would I do?
Well, and I think you suggested it too. It's very much the community look at everything. It's helping each other by being in a similar situation and being able to motivate each other to be better.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's probably the most powerful piece is, and there's a lack of direction in this, after school, we're sort of just left out in the wild to fend for ourselves. Like, where is the syllabus for
Right.
this? Well, it's a pretty large chapter, adulting, and where's the homework? Where's the term paper? I don't know. You know what I mean? So we kind of have to seek that out on our own, unless we're doing continuing education and we're on some kind of like forever doctorate track. But for a lot of us, I think it's like, oh, if I were to create a syllabus for this life school, what do I want to fill it with? What do I want on my semester's docket? Because when we're in that orientation of forever growth, and we actively get into the beginner seat, which is so triggering for so many of us, like all of I shouldn't say all, but I would say the majority of people, we don't want to do anything badly, but there's the moment before we know how to do the thing, which is sometimes a pretty large moment where, like I think of like a kid learning a string instrument, it's just not going to sound great for a really long time. But then once you cross that threshold, then you start to build confidence. And so this is where the yoga on the mat, off the mat conversation comes into play. It's, oh, if I keep showing up, if I keep with my consistency, my persistence, all of these things, then actually the desire is for growth, because the opposite of that is staying the same, possibly not challenging ourselves. So it's such a paradox, because a lot of us resist change. We just want to be in the known, but actually it's all unknown. It's a fallacy
Right.
that we could hold on to everything just as it is. That everything is in this state of non-constant, right? So I love the metaphor of in the breath. So the breath is talked a lot about in the yoga practice. This is really attuning into the present moment. Like we just had this breath in and now we have this breath out. If I were to take the principles of like trying to hold on to everything as it is, if I was like resisting growth or resisting change, the equivalent of that in the breath or the yoga sort of metaphor would be, I'm just going to take this inhale and I'm going to hold on to it. Let's see how long that lasts for, right? Right. Like eventually you're going to exhale, but then you trust there will be another inhale, right? And so what's so powerful about that is like recognizing that in the resistance for growth, there's a certain death in that, right? This like resistance to change. And so I would challenge, everyone listening to just like notice, in what aspects are you holding on, and then in which aspects are challenging those growth edges, where there's this really phenomenal cocktail. I love this perfect combination of excitement and fear coming together, right? This is when you know that you're being challenged in a way that is guiding that growth edge, but there's mostly excitement and there's just a healthy amount of fear to know that you're breaking through this next evolution of self. Because if there wasn't something to move through, like I think of, swimmers swimming laps, it's like you want that edge to push off of, right? And it's so wild because there's a lot of sort of conjuring like around triggers and things like that of like, oh, that's too edgy, and like people kind of like back away, like if something feels like there's like an edge, oh, I'm not wanting to do that. But actually, what if we leaned in those spaces, right? Where we took a pause between stimulus and response and we really just witnessed, okay, what is coming up for me? Why am I resisting to this? And what if I didn't? What if I leaned in? And what if I got uncomfortable on purpose? And that's one of the beauties of yoga is we actually stress ourselves out on purpose. There's nothing inherently wrong about stress. It's the way that we metabolize it that can be something that's a challenge. But in fact, when you look at our ancestors of long periods of fasting, of not being able to control the temperature exactly, in their homes. I mean, if they had homes,
Right, exactly.
all of these things. Meanwhile, a lot of us have like these really hyper comforts. And so then we become very emotionally allergic to anything that's just slightly outside of the comfort zone. But actually, we want to build that resiliency of, oh, if I'm, for example, holding a plank pose for one breath longer than I feel like I'm going to tap out on, and the next time I'll probably be able to hold it another breath, right? We build like more and more resilience and more stamina the more that we practice and the more we challenge. One of my favorite moments during a workshop I took a couple years ago, the speaker said, "Okay, everyone, raise your hand as high as you can." And they said, "Okay, raise it a little higher." And then everyone raised their hand a little bit higher. He's like, "Well, why didn't you do that the first time?" Right? It's like we feel like, "Oh, this is as much as I can do it." And then this is why I love being a guide. It's like, okay, go a little further, right? Because sometimes we think like, oh, this is as far as I can go. But what's so phenomenal is we actually have more of a limitless capacity than we give ourselves credit for.
We ultimately limit ourselves, don't we?
Yeah. Why do we do that?
Comfort, it's a comfort thing, I
Yeah.
believe. I look at, me and my wife, we both went back to school almost because we had nothing else to do while we were fighting our cancer battles. So, a lot of times it does take a trigger to get you moving that direction, doesn't it?
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's is so powerful because, there's certainly many people who will receive a cancer diagnosis or something like that, and it's a death sentence. not because of the cancer, but because of their orientation in their mind about the cancer, which is such a mind puzzle. That's
It
so huge. And that's not just think positive thoughts. It's not a spiritual bypass, but it's actually like an integrated knowing of your capacity to heal. And that's what you're built for, is for survival. So it's attuning to the practices that will help metabolize the things that are thrown each of our way.
A lot of people don't even realize they're doing it. It just kinda happens. If it's an instinct almost to, well, it's that flight or fight mentality, and a lot of people have a lot more fight than they give themselves credit for. And if you're
Hmm.
there, you find yourself in a whole different world at the end of it going, "Wow." And a lot of it is, yeah, it's that fight, but it's also, I think you said it perfectly too, is the education part is continuously growing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about this life, right? So one of the most powerful poses in the yoga practice is at the end of each practice, there's a shape in Sanskrit called Shavasana, which translates to corpse pose, where we literally practice our death after every practice. Like, I've done my best and I leave it. It's the ultimate surrender. And then you roll to one side. So that's a symbol of rebirth. And then you sit back up. And then there's this chance to begin anew. And so I think about that in terms of how we live our life, right? If we are actively in the practice of our mortality, knowing that it's not a given, that we're breathing, that our heart beats, all of these beautiful involuntary actions that happen without us having to think about it, right? Our brain function, our all of the organs doing their job. It's really a miracle when you think about it. And so I think what's so important to highlight is, okay, what are we doing with this one precious life, at least, this go around? And so it helps to orient to what is purpose. How are we of service? How are we connecting to nature, to community? How are we in the creativity? And so I love to highlight this, because it's like, okay, if that's the orientation, are you reaching for your phone and scrolling for hours? If that's the orientation, are you getting like hung up on like the trivial thing that seems like the trigger of the moment? Probably not. But these things that happen, they tempt us. They tempt a certain hijack of our nervous system, because we're in this really hyper speed, overstimulated environment. And so sometimes it's like all we can do is seek for the thing to dull, because we think we need to have a break, but we kind of like reach for the easy thing. So this is why, Instagram and Netflix and popcorn and like all the processed foods, alcohol, like whatever it is, we each have our thing. I'm not trying to say that I've arrived to some kind of enlightened space. Sometimes I'll reach for the thing, but I think more and more it's turning the dial up on the awareness, where you could sort of like be your own commentator on your life, of like, oh wow, here I am, I'm snacking, like watch me go. Or like whatever the thing is, like here I am, like reaching to online shop. Here I am, and then sometimes it's like, okay, let me just play this out, see how I feel. Like, and it's like this really quick dopamine hit, which almost scratches the itch. And this is where, the addiction conversation comes in. It's like, these things that almost scratch the itch, but they don't. And so ultimately, the question, and this is only for each person to answer because it's so individual, is what actually connects you to living a life well lived?
Yourself. I mean, you're limited to yourself is how I feel.
Mhm.
That's the whole purpose behind Go Out Living. It's the attitude.
Mhm.
You determine where you go, but that attitude, you're not gonna have regrets in my mind if you follow that, and that's exactly what you're
Mhm.
saying.
Mhm. Yeah, it's so interesting, the conversation on regret, because there's a thought of, this might be like a meme, no regrets, which
Right.
which has a certain connotation of living unabashedly, living life to the fullest, not letting an opportunity go. But actually, in the growth conversation is perhaps we could allow for space where the regrets are a teaching experience. So there's a teacher in all things if we're open to it, right? So the coworker that just is driving you crazy, like he's a teacher for you, you know, like your mom who's just like relentless on this thing, she's also a teacher for you. And easier said than done. I know very well this is true. But it's so important because I think when we attune to the connection to source, when we connect to being in the space of love, we can't be grateful and fearful at the same time. And when we look at how our old knee jerk reactions are showing up, there's such a really nuanced approach to encountering life where the no regrets that you're talking about are here. So what comes to mind is Buddha's law, which I think, we could really pass through every thought, every word, every action, is we ask ourselves three questions. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? And if we're honest with that, and we're running thoughts, words, and actions through, is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Then that definitely softens a lot.
I mean, it's so
it's
true,
it's a
though. I mean,
practice.
something you can think of so minute, if you put it in those terms, is actually quite large, can be quite
Mhm.
large, you
Mhm.
know? It can be very powerful.
Certainly. Yeah. I love it so much because it really helps also refine where are the places, who are the people, and what are the things that you're attuning to that are uplifting you, right? So this is probably like a very common example. So say someone is in a relationship where every time you talk to them, they're like complaining about their significant other, that, they're doing this and they're not doing that. At a certain point, right? You've asked for what you want, it's not happening. We want to orient around the people and the place that are uplifting. Similarly, like if you're living in a city, you're complaining about the traffic all the time. Guess what? Like you're a part of it. I had that moment in LA like 8 years in, like, oh right, I'm a part of it. I could leave, Th- and that's also a luxury. Some people think like, well, my family's here or my relationship is here. Sometimes it's not so easy, but it is important to just look at what the recurring thoughts are because, there's studies that oh my gosh, upwards of 90% of the thoughts are on repeat, the things that we kind of like chew on and chew on over and over. And so when we look at, okay, what are the recurring thoughts that are dampening our light? And so this is a big part of the shine mission of what is behind my book and my membership and everything is if you had a dimmer switch, right, of like your own light, so that's like your feeling of uplift, your connection to joy, your creativity, where you feel of service, all of these things. And if there's something about the place that you're in, the people you're surrounding yourself with, the things that you're doing that it's like they have a hold of that dimmer switch and they're dialing it down. It's a really good point when you're aware of it because a lot of people are just kind of like asleep to it because it's like oh it is what it is. That's like a common phrase. It's like it doesn't have to be. In fact, if you can be in the driver's seat of your life, right, have agency to make a shift, which definitely is challenging. I'm not trying to say that it isn't, but in that awareness of it, then how can you navigate to create that space for yourself where you are living a life well lived?
I go back to I had a guest on Dr. Moss, and he he was so right, and since I've had him and listened to him, every moment I have come up and I start questioning myself, the one thing that comes into my mind is what he said, that there's one thing that is guaranteed in our life, and that is to not be here tomorrow or the next day or whatever. Death is part of everybody's life, and that's the guarantee. So why are you waiting? What are you looking for in the meantime?
Mm.
And it's so
Mhm.
true. It's like, and that's how I look at the decisions I'm making now. It's I don't know
Mm.
if I'm gonna be here tomorrow, so what's it gonna hurt?
Yeah.
Is it that simple though?
There's definitely, a certain carpe diem aspect of, like how how much do you want to turn the dial up on that? Does it mean, you're living this day where you're like, I'm going scuba diving and then I'm jumping out of a plane and then I'm getting on a plane to Paris and I'm just having a baguette and a wheel of brie and then, you know what I mean? Like you could just be in the movie version of your life where you're doing all the bucket list items and you could do that to a certain degree, right? If you have the ability to, why not? And in fact, I think that it's so wise to look at just to come back to a little bit how we began the conversation of if you say that you can't do something, then you prove yourself right. Oftentimes, even just taking a holiday, people have a block against. "Oh, no, I can't do that. The kids or, my mom's in the hospital or, I have to save because my best friend's getting married this summer and they're having a destination wedding." It's so important to look at where the limitations are happening by your own mind. So I think about, when I was in college, I definitely felt like there was shame around going on spring break. Like I had it wired that I had to work. I don't remember anyone telling me I had to work. I just felt like, oh no, this is the responsible thing to do. And so, I had friends that, would go to Cancun and my roommate and I were like, "No, no, we have to work." you know. And we've talked about it, recently. It's like, why didn't we go to Cancun? That would have been so fun, you know. And, however much I made waiting tables, in college, like did that really change my life? So, I think it's going back to what you said, it does really make you look at, okay, certainly there's fiscal responsibility. There's, the need to pay our expenses. We don't want to just throw caution to the wind and do all of these really risky things because maybe we may not wake up tomorrow. However, I think there is a certain amount of inquiry of, if we felt like the time was more finite than just sort of ongoing forever and ever, what are the ways that we would invest in ourselves that would actually contribute more than kind of like head down in the grind? Like, I would hope that, how are you doing? It would be like, oh, I feel really inspired. I feel really connected. Um, I'm really excited about this new song I'm learning on the guitar. Let me play it for you. Versus like, oh, just another day at the office, kind of conversation, and so there's a dance, and I think, each person can only answer it for themselves. But certainly when I lead retreats, one of the greatest gifts that people get is by detaching from the daily rhythm, they're able to slow down in a way that they don't even realize, right, when they're in the marathons and in even this, like, the sprint version of the marathon of their life. They don't even realize all of the stresses that they hold because they're just habituated into, whatever it is, like house, kids, spouse, dog, like all the different attentions with work or whatever the thing is. And then, okay, here we are in Portugal, for example, and all of the meals are prepared by the chefs that go out in the garden, and everything's picked fresh, and you just show up and we stretch, and then we go into town and we explore. And it's like time slows down and we're in exploration, and we realize, oh right, this is actually what it feels like for the nervous system to be in that rest and digest state where we feel taken care of. We're luxuriating in all of life's beauty, and relishing in that. And then we all have the ability to do that, right? There's an infinite well when we're opening the the possibility of it. And so I just love to share that, because I think it's so tempting to think like, oh, well, that's great for these other people over here. If it's a priority, I had a friend that says, show me your calendar, I'll show you what your priorities are. But it's so true.
Yeah,
And, if you keep a digital calendar and you color code it in some way, what are you doing your awake hours the majority of the time? And so and then are you enjoying that? Does it feel uplifting to you? Do you feel like you're in that space of growth? Does it feel empowering? And then maybe it's just lingering in the question of what would be the thing. Because sometimes that feels elusive. I've asked people, tell me about your dream day. And it, like, almost like deer in headlights. A lot of people don't know what they would do. They know what they don't want to do.
right.
That's very
Exactly.
clear.
Yeah, exactly.
So, the invitation might be just pen to paper, take some time and just feel into, where in the world are you? Do you wake up alone? Are you with someone? Are there people in the place? How do you start your day? And what's great about that is you can just be in the imagination of it, and then you can feel into, on a physiological level, of what are the energetics of that. And what's so empowering about that, just in the way that you don't actually have to stand on your hands, you can visualize the possibility of that dream day. And then the energetics of that, usually that state is freedom. And so it's like, okay, how would I breathe if I was in a space of freedom? Well, I probably wouldn't be like short labored breath. I'd probably send the breath into my belly, right? Like I would feel that take over my body, and then it's like, oh, like if I'm just in that space, then like the way that you wash the dishes is different. The way that you're talking to your wife is different. You're just like, ah, so that might be a fun exercise. I'd love to hear what people come to with
Right.
that.
Here's my probably last question. How do people, like I said, it took me a diagnosis to really get me to start thinking about my life and changing things. How do people do it before a huge trigger moment, or how do they do it on their everyday life? When do they take that breath and say, okay, let's write this
Yeah.
down?
Yeah. Like, let's call it now.
Right.
Ready? Go. Go
Exactly.
live your life.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I have a client and a friend who is a workaholic. She burns the candle at both ends like no other. Woman after my own heart. I get it. And I can call it every time. I would say, are we on for our practice this week? And if she says that she has to work and she cancels, I know she's about to get sick. And I just highlight this because when we tax ourselves to a degree, the body will tell us to take a break. And so I think what's so important about deciding now is then you decide to revolutionize your life to the degree that you want without a cancer diagnosis, without getting COVID, without all of a sudden getting the flu and you're being forced to be in the hospital, or however extreme the body wants to show you, some kind of autoimmune thing shows up, or what have you. What's so powerful about living your life by design is you're shifting away from this very common way that a lot of us live, is living a life by default, right? When we're forced to do it. And then we're in a space of, oh gosh, you know, I wish I would have all of these things if I had only known that I would, have stage 4 cancer or whatever the diagnosis is. I would have done these things differently. Right? It's that common thing of, all of a sudden a loved one dies without warning, and you're like, "Oh gosh, I would have told them how much I love them, how
Yeah.
much they inspired me." And so more and more, I think these things happen to remind us of, "Oh, let's not wait for that," right? Like, let's just be very liberal about sharing with our loved ones how much they mean to us. Let's be like very open to living our life by design here and now, ahead of the diagnosis, ahead of the sickness. If you have the capacity to use your legs, that's not everyone, right? I think about, when my aunt had a stroke and she was paralyzed completely on one side. My mom and I thought, oh my gosh, like all the things that we would miss doing, and just so much empathy of, just being able to go out for a walk. And, certainly during these cold times, it's so tempting, depending on, when you're listening to this, but if it's cold where you are, it's so tempting to say, I'm not going to go outside. Right? But maybe, actually, to circle back, maybe the thing is you bundle up, you go outside, you get to feel the cold. Maybe you're not out for that long,
Right.
right? But just have a little bit of movement, connection to nature, and maybe just trying on, if today was my last, would I feel good about just sitting here in the scroll, in my emails, in the messages, or, whatever the sort of pull is, or could I actually meet up with that friend and do the thing that feels stretchy? I think this is actually really common, and we're just coming now, depending on when you're listening to this, to the 6-year anniversary of the shutdown. And so I think we're still kind of metabolizing this like hyper isolated, hyper loneliness, hyper sedentary epidemic. And we really need to move through that. There's a huge call for movement in every sense. And so it's so important to look at that, of how do I connect with others? How do I connect with myself, to nature, and be in that uplift, because it's so tempting. There's actually a lot of reasons to just pull back, right? And to retreat. And I find myself doing that. Even just last night, I thought, oh gosh, I'm just going to go home. I'm just going to shower and I'm just going to, read. And I thought, okay, I need to see other people. And so I forced myself to bundle up. I took my dog to the dog park, and I ended up having this really wonderful conversation with a couple, and they were there with their 4 dogs. And I thought, yeah, like, every time that we push through that initial resistance and we actually go and we create connection, I've never regretted.
It's true. It's yeah,
Mhm.
it's amazing feeling, isn't it? It's and everybody can have it. Just give yourself the opportunity to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, like, even like, I love this podcast format. It's like everyone gets to be a voyeur on these conversations. And what's so powerful about this almost old time radio, harkening back to the days before we had screens, is, like, you could gather with your family and just be, sitting on the floor listening. You could take this out on a walk. You could use the technology to couple listening with something that feels grounding and uplifting to you. So, I love listening to podcasts on a nature walk. Sometimes I like to be unplugged and just be in the sounds of nature. But oftentimes, I might lay down on I have this really cozy shag carpet in my living room, and I'll just stretch while I listen. And so it helps to just have light movement. And then I love listening with a friend, because then after the conversation, you can say, oh, like, this really resonated with me. What did you think about this? Or, I love to, like, share an episode that feels meaningful to me with a friend, and then having a conversation about it afterwards, because there's this layer of listening, and then there's this layer of sharing with it, which, goes back to what you were saying earlier, of really connecting into that growth. Because when we can articulate how we've processed something, and then we can hear from someone else how they've processed it, then it sparks these different constellations in the brain of, oh, that reminds me of this. And then you're in this conversation, which, goes back to, like, my early memories with my grandparents of, oh, that reminds me of a story. And then you're in that connection, which is just so powerful.
Yeah, it's the storytelling. It's so important, especially nowadays.
Mhm.
Just started, I didn't like the platforms I was on, they're podcasts, but there's no communication. And every part of this podcast was to create communication, to create a community that talked and storytelled and all that. So I'm really happy that I'm on a new platform called School, and it's SKOOL .com. And it's a platform for everybody to come to listen to a podcast, and then talk about it. through the platform. I'm even going to start something that's called Christie's Corner, where you become a member, you can come on the podcast and talk about what you've seen or heard or tell your story, because that's what it's all about, really.
Mhm.
That's what's exciting to me, is to hear guests like you, your stories, and how you're inspiring others, because that's what we all need. There's just something in me that it's like, it gives me
Mm.
it's exciting, it's fun, and we
It
learn
is.
something.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that so much. Okay.
So Veronique Ory, I really appreciate it. Do you wanna tell us a little bit about the book, the name, and everything that you're in, and then we're gonna post it on the blog.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So, all my offerings can be found on my website, yogawithveronique.com. And it's the French
Oh, I
Veronica,
always screw it
just
up,
in
I
case.
know.
It's okay. It was named after Veronica, but I
Oh,
was born in a French-speaking place in Montreal, so they went with the French version. So, yeah, yogawithveronique.com. You can learn about my book, which is called Shine On and Off the Mat. And what has been so wonderful to come from that has been a membership platform. So it's an interactive book that takes you through a journey of timely and timeless themes like let go, slowing down. And in fact, I started writing it week one of COVID. And so aptly, the first theme was let go. And what's phenomenal is, you could start it today, and I'm sure there are things that you could be practicing letting go of it. It just is one of those things where we'll just constantly and continuously be practicing that. And so there are guided meditations, there's a movement practice and a stretch practice, so it's a three-part series. Each class, each video on demand is just 20 minutes because that's the perfect amount of time to shapeshift the physiology. So this is really great if you have an important meeting or you want to weave in this rhythm of, oh, I want to wake up a bit more mindful, or maybe you've been having trouble sleeping and this would be a really great wind down before going to bed. And you could be in this conversation certainly on your own, and the invitation is actually to be in community with these conversations. And so you can, within the membership, invite friends to join, whether you want to be in a virtual space, on video or on phone, however you're comfortable, or in person. And I love that because there's so many times where we're sort of in the in between. So maybe you're, waiting for a flight and you're at the gate, hours before, you could think, oh, work out the time zone and connect with a friend who you haven't talked to in a minute, do the guided meditation together, and then be in the conversation afterwards. It's such a great way to really lean into that antidote of shifting away from the loneliness and the sedentary epidemic, where we can actually intentionally connect with one another in a way that feels really meaningful. So all of that lives within the membership. And so the membership is called Shine. And you can go in, there's a 7-day free trial, no obligation whatsoever, and try it out and see what you think. There's music playlists, which a lot of my clients, they really love listening to the music on their commute or while they're doing chores or errands, because it just creates a certain energy of ease, right? So it's like if you're in that daydream of your dream day, it shifts how you're driving, how you're folding the laundry, or whatever the daily rhythm is. And so that, I think the music is such a great way to shape shift that. In the You can literally change the soundtrack that's in your mind. I think about times where I've been sad and I'll intentionally play sad music because I want to allow that catharsis of tears to come through. And then there's this moment where okay, I need to change the music because this feels really sad.
Right.
And so the music is a real powerful tool, and so all of that is available on there as well, and then there are journal prompts that are connected to each theme, and so you can just ponder it, but if you're someone that likes to write down how you're processing, there's actually great power of putting pen to paper, right? Like how we were talking about the ways that we limit ourselves. Everything I've written down has happened. And what's so powerful about that is we get really clear and we let go of the things that are limiting, and then when we're in that space, it's like the universe conspires and it like speeds up to meet us. And that's part of, what you're talking about in terms of the mind helping the physical health and moving through things that feel, you know, that maybe we're taught or told, this is what the prognosis is, but it's not necessarily the case, right? We have agency to shift that. So all of that is on my website. You can also find information about my retreats. I have two retreats on the horizon this year. So far, there's one at the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York, this spring, May 31st to June 5th, and it's an immersion. So what's powerful about this is we're able to move through these practices together. And so if the shine and any of this seems like elusive, this would be a really great way to integrate it so it's really specific to how it can fold into your day, your lifestyle, and all of that. And then I have a retreat this fall, October 24th to the 31st, that I lead with my friend Erin, and that will be in Italy. It'll be on the
Mm.
east coast of Italy, and we'll eat amazing food and have some cultural immersions. And we always plan excursions and ways to explore the place. And it's really a wellness holiday. So never think like you have to be this expert yoga practitioner. Actually, a lot of people come who have never done yoga before, but they're just wanting connection to community. And that's really the best part, is being at the same table and having conversations while having great food, and you make lifelong friends. And so that's been part of the greatest joy of like-minded but also like-hearted souls coming together, of wanting to uplift one another, and wanting to feel like, yeah, this is a life well lived right here.
That sounds amazing, absolutely amazing. I wanna come.
Yeah, come, absolutely.
Oh, that sounds great. It really does. Like I said, I'll put everything on the blog as well, all your information, so everybody can go check that out. It was a pleasure. I mean, absolute pleasure.
You did,
All
Veronique,
right.
yes.
Veronique Ory, thank you so much. And for those of you watching, I really appreciate all of you. Remember, find the attitude, keep the attitude, go out living.